Hello and welcome to Know Their Law. Do you know the law? Especially immigration law. This is the show called Know the Law, and I'm your favorite host, Pastor Larry O. Amodia. Today we're going to be talking about asylum law, refugee cases, the big refugee matter. We are going to be dealing with this from the European law point of view, and also from the point of view of each individual EU country, with emphasis on the Netherlands. As usual, we have the friend of the African, the most popular and most famous attorney in the Netherlands, Antoine Kleinweg. How you doing, sir?
I'm happy, Pastor. Larry.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be talking about immigration asylum laws. Are you ready for us?
I'm ready for it, Pastor Larry.
All right. Well, folks, before we get to Antoine Kleinweg, I'd like you to pick up the phone, dial a friend, call your mama, call your papa, call your auntie, call the chicken, get them in front of the television, because when we get back, it's going to be hot. Now, let's talk about immigration. What is immigration?
Pastor Larry, immigration is basically that one person living in one country, having the nationality of that country, decides to move to another country and live there and ask for permission to stay there. Of course, you can also stay without permission, but then that might cause some troubles.
So, in the case of one person with the citizenship of one country, planning or living in another country, you're saying that's immigration.
Yes, Pastor.
But why is it that some people go to another country and say they want to claim asylum? What is asylum, and what relation does that have to do with immigrating?
Of course, asylum is a form of immigration because you want to come from one country and live in another country, but it is a very specific form of immigration. Asylum is something you request to the receiving state where you come because you are having a serious and authentic fear of persecution in your own country where you came from because of your race, social background, your identity, your nationality, your political point of view, anything that is causing you a grave fear, a serious fear of being persecuted in your own country.
Now, so practically, if someone is afraid, then they have a right to live in another place. If they have a fear of living in their country, this is what you're telling us.
The fear in the country, the fear must be substantial, because it is not so that everybody who fears to live in a certain country can come and live in another country. You must be able to explain and to support your story why you are so afraid in your country. Are you a political active and are you being prosecuted for your political beliefs? Is it because of your religion? It is not so that you can come to one country, for instance the Netherlands, and say, I'm afraid of my own country, can I have a residence permit now? No, you must be able to explain why you are so afraid in your country, and you also must make clear that it is a real fear, not something you only fear, but it is a realistic thing that you are afraid of.
Now, thank you for talking about fear, but if I'm afraid to walk down the streets because some people bully me, is that not a good fear?
Pastor Larry, nobody would dare to bully you, but it is not necessarily a good fear. However, it could be if you are afraid of being not only bullied, but prosecuted or killed or tortured because of, for instance, your religion or your political point of view or even your sexual preferences. It could be any reason why you could be afraid, but not only being afraid a little bit, but you must fear for your life and for your well-being. Then, if you can substantiate that fear and you can prove why you are afraid, then you might be entitled to asylum.
Okay, so you have to be able to prove why you are afraid.
Yes.
So, for instance, if you are a Christian and Muslims are killing the Christians, then you can leave your country because you don't want to be killed by the Muslims.
That is a possibility, and of course, in some countries, one group tries to kill the other people. In other countries, the other group tries to kill the people. But if you are afraid for a certain group, and your local government is not willing or able to protect you against those other groups, then you might be entitled to asylum in a European country.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just trying to identify what qualifies fear. So a tribal clash, like the Tutsi and the whatever fighting each other, that could qualify for fear.
A tribal clash could qualify for fear if the government that should protect all citizens of a country, no matter their tribe, is ruled by one of those tribes. If you're a member of tribe A and tribe B is holding the government and the army and the police, and tribe B is trying to kill all members of tribe A, then the members of tribe A, in my point of view, of course I'm not a specialist in asylum law, but in immigration law in general, but in my point of view then, the people who are being prosecuted have good reasons to fear and have also good reasons to apply for asylum.
So someone who's afraid in their country, somebody watching us in Romania, Slovakia, Bosnia, Africa, Mogadishu, and they think they have a fear. What do they need to take with them to be able to qualify to apply for asylum in another country, especially in EU?
What is needed to qualify for asylum is that you are able to put forward your story to the authorities of the country where you arrive. Could be the Netherlands, could be any other country. One of the things you must prove is your identity. So, if possible, bring documents with you proving your identity, your nationality. Also, when you express your fear for circumstances, try to bring as much information and knowledge about those circumstances with you. If there are horrible events happening in your country and you maybe have been in the center of one of these events, maybe you have been in the newspapers, maybe you have people who can testify about you as a person, maybe your pastor in the country of origin, maybe teachers, maybe party members, anyone who could shed light on the circumstances might be useful evidence. So bring that evidence and that information with you. Don't believe people who tell you you must tell this story or that story. No, tell the truth, because a story that is invented is not acceptable. The immigration authorities will be smart enough to find out that you're telling a story. Tell the truth and the complete and full truth. That might help you.
So, bring your ID, passport, and testimony from credible witnesses, like pastors or people who can testify that this happened to you.
Yes, that's correct, Pastor Larry, because when you apply for asylum, basically you arrive at a state and you ask for help, and then you must explain why you're asking for help and protection. First thing that must be clear is who you are, where are you coming from? Because everyone can say, I'm coming from this country or that country and I need protection. But are you really coming from that country? Are you really who you are that you say that you are? So that is step number one, prove who you are. Step number two is explain very clear why you are so afraid to go back to your country of origin. And also show why the authorities in your country cannot help you and protect you against being persecuted.
So, but what if you can't show why the authorities or how they can protect you. See, because this is a situation with asylum. I understand that some people make up stories
That happens.
and they get believed, but some people tell the truth and they don't get the asylum help. So how can an immigration officer or a lawyer authenticate that this person is telling the truth, especially in the case of somebody who is not able to bring those documents? Like you said, get your ID. If there's a war in Mogadishu or wherever, Bosnia, right now, and you're running and you're fleeing, how do you get your ID? You know, getting ID is one of the last things on your mind. How can you prove that this happened to you when you're already in the other side of the on the other side of the wall? How can you prove that? Well, what alternative does this person have when they don't have any of those documents to prove?
Pastor Larry, a Dutch saying is, waar een wil is een weg. If there is a will, there is a way. So the people then, if they don't have the documents with them, they can tell their true identity, explain their real story, and they can try to contact the people in their country of origin with the request, can you get me confirmation who I am? Can you get me a copy of my passport or a copy of my birth certificate? Can you get any information substantiating who I am? Can I have a letter from my old school teacher, the headmaster, who can confirm that I have been in school there? Maybe you have family there who can prove that they are your family members.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, but let's look at this clearly. In a case of war or persecution, and you're running, and perhaps you don't have this family, or maybe they've even killed the family members, and you don't have contact because you're not from Africa. I'm from Africa, and I know sometimes it's hard to even have ties back home that you can connect to. So if you don't have these people to get these things for you, or sometimes they need money to get things for you, like if I want something from Africa, I have to send money. If you don't have the money, or you don't have the people to get it for you, but your situation is real and true and you left in fear, how do you get this immigration judge or officers to really believe you? There has to be another way to accept the fact that this person has been in trouble or is trying to prove a case. What is the alternative?
Pastor, in that case, it is possible for the people to tell their whole story and provide as much as possible detail about where they went to school, about what the name of the teacher was, where they have been living, what church they have been attending, who is the pastor at that time. Because the immigration authorities have a huge computer system called INDIS, and in that computer system there is for every country a whole database of knowledge, detailed knowledge about most places in a certain country. If you tell your story and they can see from the story you tell the details are correct, indeed there was a church with that name, indeed the pastor then had this, was this person, the school was there, this event happened,
Now,
then it is being checked and double checked and then your story is confirmed.
Fair enough. If you're already in EU,
Yes.
and you didn't come for asylum, you either came as a visitor or you find yourself on the boat, but you now decide to apply for asylum. Do you have the right to apply for asylum based on the fact that you're already here and you fear something that is happening there or has happened there or could happen there? So I'm giving you some cases now. Something that has happened, could happen, or you're afraid might happen to you. But you're already here in the EU. Can you now make a claim that you don't want to go back and file for asylum? Is there a provision for that?
There is a possibility, but it must then be a circumstance that happened recently. Because imagine you come into the Netherlands, you live here without a residence permit for, let's say, 5 or 6 years, and after that you decide, I want to apply for asylum because I want a kind of residence permit. That's not going to work. But however, If through circumstances there is a new reason to fear a return to your country, maybe the country is ending, when you left the country it was a normal country, but it became a war zone, or there has been a political change, substantial political change in your country of origin, and from that moment on it was not safe to go back to that country, then it is possible to apply for asylum. That recently happened in, not in Iraq, but in Kuwait, when it was invaded by the Iraqi forces. There were people from Kuwait who did not dare to go back to their own country, and they applied for asylum. It was granted, at least temporarily, asylum, until Iraq was removed from Kuwait and the people could return.
Okay, so in other words, if something happened recently,
Yes.
and you're afraid because of that, you can use that to apply for asylum, is what
Yes.
we're getting today. But one part of asylum that bothers me is the issue of female genital mutilation.
Yes.
It is believed, well, I don't know anyone who's done this, but I've heard stories that women can apply for asylum on the grounds that they don't want to be circumcised in their home country. Now, please tell me, how does this come into fear and asylum?
Well, Pastor, female gender mutilation is a serious thing, and it is a very rather gruesome operation if that happens to you. So it is possible that a woman who is not politically active, but because of her sex is afraid for being returned to her country, because of it, if she is not able to run away from the operation, how shall I say it? If you are being sent back to a country where for you is not the possibility to denounce female gender mutilation and to say, no, it's not going to happen to me or to my daughter, if you really cannot avoid that situation, then a country would send you back into a situation which is, according to European law, not acceptable. Under that circumstances, it is possible that some residence permit will be granted, although it might not be an official permit as a refugee, because that is more for the political cases, but then there will be a permit for humanitarian reasons.
So humanitarian compassion
yes.
cases. Okay, so practically what you're saying is someone can get a residence or some type of stay on the fear that they're afraid that they will be circumcised,
Yes.
In the case of women.
Yes.
What about men? Can men apply?
Well, Pastor Lardy, as far as I know, if there is circumcision concerning men, it's only a little cut. And
It's only a little cut?
yes.
Hold on, a cut is a cut. A cut is a cut. Client.
Well, Pastor, it could be if you are, if the operation will be massive, then it would be a reason to apply for.
But I think that's discrimination. You'll accept women that says they don't want to be circumcised, but men who don't want to be circumcised, they're on their own.
You have a point there, but we are comparing now the male circumcision, which is just a little cut.
He said it's just a little cut.
I would not choose it for me myself, but however, comparing that with the female circumcision, which is a horrible operation equaling, how to say it, torture
Yeah.
and inhuman treatment. So if the operation between men and women would be the same, it would be also reason for men to apply for humanitarian permit. But since the operation for men is not so terrible, and
I don't think
I see your fear, Pastor, but for women it is a possibility because it's a real bad operation.
Well, asylum. Where did the world come up with the word asylum? I mean, like, what's the foundation
That is an ancient word. It's coming from Greek, as far as I know, and it was already used for the option for people to ask protection in churches and in cities. Asylum meant offering somebody shelter and protection against persecution of any kind.
So, if someone is in EU and they go and hide in a church and they stay in the church and say they don't want to go back to their home country, can immigration officers enter the church premises and take the person?
That depends on which country you're in, the national law, but effectively, even if they could, they will not, out of respect for churches. And in most churches, in most countries, it is so that the law protects people quite a lot against being arrested in churches. So the immigration authorities, in my opinion, will not enter any church just to get somebody out who is an irregular immigrant. Of course, if you are an irregular immigrant, or not even a Dutchman, and you have a serious criminal offense on your name, then the police will be able to come and take you out, and they will do so. But I don't think a church will grant you asylum in the church if you have a serious criminal offense on your name.
But if it's for asylum purpose, you're saying immigration officers traditionally would not go in and take the person?
No, traditionally not, and not for legal purposes either, because for entering a church, you need a kind of authorization offered by the mayor of the city, and that authorization will not be granted easily.
That's new. But now, Edward Snowden, the American private guy who recently got asylum in Russia.
Yes.
This guy was taking secrets from the American CIA and government and releasing it to the world. He now runs to Russia and he's given asylum.
Yes.
How do you think the Russian government is justified to give, because to me that would be a criminal offense to take confidential government information, pass it to somebody, and then you run away and say you're afraid of persecution. I'm still trying to lay my finger on that. How do you qualify his asylum in Russia to be a bona fide case of,
First of all, that is a decision taken by the Russian government, and it is to justify that by the Russian government. I don't think that Mr. Putin is caring much about laws. He's not overly fond of treaties and conventions.
Okay.
So if Mr. Putin says this guy gets asylum,
He gets it.
he has asylum.
So it's not about the convention.
I'm afraid it's not about the convention. If we look at it a little bit further, of course, not every crime is a common criminal offense. Every country can make any behavior and take it and describe it as a crime. It could be a crime to wear red socks.
Okay.
You could get a life sentence for it if it is a criminal offense. However, that is silly. Mr. Snowden has done something which is under United States law, is a criminal offense.
Exactly.
And the United States law and the United States want to prosecute him for it. However, it is very well possible that under international law, what Mr. Snowden did was not a criminal offense, because he only gave disclosure of behavior of a government, in this case the United States government, who are not operating within the law themselves. And giving disclosure and exposing that can be an international good act. So I can imagine that Mr. Snowden must not be judged like a common criminal who did steal things or did spy for an enemy. He just disclosed information.
So he told the truth according to what was going on, and
Yes.
he is afraid of facing the truth.
He gave information that made the United States of America very unhappy. However, that might be
Good for
useful
the
for
for the
mankind,
international
for
world. Yeah.
international world. And the prosecution of Mr. Snowden, look at Mr. Bradley Manning, what happened to him, might be quite brutal and might lead to a severe punishment. So severe that you can see it as inhuman treatment in European law.
So when we look at Bradley and we look at Snowden, it would appear that a critical look at the U.S. international law, or the way the U.S. local law,
Yes.
in the face of the international community, may not be very well kosher. In other words, if Bradley is being sentenced to 20 or life,
Yes.
and Snowden could have been sentenced to probably the same thing or
Yes.
worse, it would appear that the U.S. local law needs an international intervention, is
Yes.
what I'm getting.
Yes, because we're speaking now about United States law, but basically we are talking about a situation where a country is doing something that is not good or sometimes evil, like in the case of Mr. Bradley Manning. There was a disclosure of a human
Human rights violation and killing of
it was
people.
horrible, and then you can make it a criminal offense to give the disclosure about that, and to provide information about your own evil things.
Mhm.
But that is not always according to European or at least international law.
Now let's come back to Europe. In Europe, we have the case of European law and the law of the country.
Yes.
How do you size up the Netherlands immigration law, general, the Netherlands immigration law, compared to the EU law? Because I'm thinking, why do you have what you call EU law and then you have the country law? For me, I still can't get my hand on it. Maybe you can help us as a lawyer. Why do they have two separate laws? And at some point, they both merge. And this merger causes a conflict where things have to be challenged and taken to the EU law, or things get buried in the local law. Well, what's your perspective on this 2 or 3 dimensional law?
It has a historical background. In Europe, many countries had their own, at least every country had its own law, and some countries, like in the past Germany and Austria, went quite bad, but also Spain, and they enforced laws that were quite evil, to put it that way. European law came after World War II and said national law must be in compliance with European law. So national governments can make laws, but they must be within the lines of European law. You cannot go too far left, you cannot go too far right. So it is a system that stabilizes and avoids extreme national law.
Yeah, but that's the problem that I have. Recently on the news, I think it was just yesterday in the Netherlands news, they passed a law, or is it EU? Yeah, on the news, that if you get a ticket, a boete, anywhere in the EU, now it can be traced back to your local town, to your local, in other words, the fine can be collected or payable in your country.
Yes.
In the past, it was if you got a ticket in France or Germany, you didn't care because you didn't live there. So now the point is, why can't they just have one EU law that blankets the entire European Union? Why do you have local law and then you have EU law, leaving room for disparity and questions?
Okay, because in this case, European countries are also united in a kind of European state. It's not like that, but I would like to see it that way. Laws should be enforced equally in Europe, in every country. So you will not have countries where the law is very relaxed,
But that's my point. That's what I'm saying.
and you have countries where the law is very strict. What I was talking about in my previous answer was about political rights, human rights, immigration law. These are the normal things that must be enforced in Europe. So Europe will be
One.
same and one in every part of Europe. It's quite simple. Road safety requires penalties, because if you're speeding, driving drunk, driving through a red light, you must be fined. If you are a member of one country and you move to another country on holiday and you think you can do your own street race there, that should be stopped.
Okay.
And to do that, to enable that to the European countries, they are joining in. They share their information about the ownership of the car, and the fine will be also sent to your home.
But the point is this. As an attorney, do you think it makes life easy to make the immigration law one blanket law that covers all of the EU? Or is it easier having local law and EU law? What is your take based on your experience?
It would be easier to make all laws the same, but then you cannot make laws which are made to measure. Then you get one law that should fit for all, but since the countries are all different, one law does not fit all.
Yeah, but when you say they're different, the EU is one country.
Yes. However, for the EU law, there are two systems of law in the EU. That governing the migration of EU members, nationals within the European Union and their family members. And you have that they call third nationals who are entering the European Union. So if somebody from Spain is entering the Netherlands, he will receive the same treatment as somebody from Germany entering Spain. That part of immigration is all the same in all of Europe. The only difference is the national law is ruling still the national immigration. So if somebody from, let's say, Africa or China is moving to a European country, this person is not an EU member, he is not a national of the EU, the EU law is not applicable in this person, and then the national law is applicable.
On a final note, we have a few minutes left. And before we came on set, you had your notes.
Yes.
What would you like to say about Asylum that you think could really help our viewers that we haven't talked about?
My advice is, if you want to apply for asylum, get yourself contact with a specialized lawyer. In every country in Europe, there are groups of lawyers really specialized in immigration law and in asylum law. Get information first and then apply for asylum. And also be active. Don't wait until you got stopped by the police and then apply for asylum, because then you don't have credibility anymore. When you enter a country and you want to apply for asylum, right away contact an asylum lawyer and right away apply for asylum, because then you have a stronger case than when you are not fresh in the country and you seem to apply asylum just to avoid arrest and detention.
Now, just listening to you, what if someone out there has already applied for asylum and they were denied, but yet they are afraid to go back to their country? So in other words, if you've already applied for asylum and it did not go through, what should you do if you know that you still have the fear to go back to that country? What are the options for that person?
In general, I would say study your file, really study it and see why it was rejected, because sometimes asylum is rejected because there was not clarity about some subjects. And the other advice I would say is try to keep a low profile as possible and try to avoid any contact with police or authorities unless you applied for any other kind of procedure again.
Yeah, but I understand that if you want to apply for another procedure, you're not allowed, especially in the case of Netherlands. Is that true?
It is partly true. You can of course apply, but you can only apply with success if you provide the government with new arguments, new facts